Hello everybody, welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. Today we're going to talk about fan brushes on this mini episode. Just some ideas for how to use them for watercolor. The fan brush is not something you need, it's just kind of a trick brush, but I'm going to give you 2 or 3 ideas and ways to use these for special effects. And they mostly come into play with landscape. You can see here there's quite a range of sizes, and they'll go up even larger than this. This is one of the smallest I've ever seen, but they get quite big. One of the most common techniques for fan brush use in watercolor is this. And let's say we're painting some ground with it can be a wet or a dry. If it's dry, it's going to pick up the paint that's there. It's a little grass technique. It's a great grass maker. I'll get that sheen off of there, so that glare, so you can see it. And that's what a lot of people will say fan brushes are great for, and it is great for that. You could spend hours painting all those little hair-like details, and to keep it from looking too patterned, usually you grab it, you can twist it, and that will close up the gap. You can even go edge on to add some wide blades in there. Great for brush, you know, it's a great brush for brush. Alright, here's a couple of lesser known techniques. Now if you know good old Bob Ross, this primarily works better with oils, but it does work with watercolor. I call it the side crunch. So basically you take this, turn it on its side, and you crunch the edge. One of the things good old Bob Ross used to do is do this kind of back and forth motion and make fir trees. Well, he would usually start at the top and kind of go back and forth like that. Works better with oils, but that's still a cool technique. You can side crunch and you'll make some nice neat little random marks. You can add that, you know, to something you painted before. Alright, here's a couple more. I just like to paint on edge with it. I get some interesting variation and organic kind of looks when I'm adding texture or whatnot to a foreground. This is one of my favorite things to use a fan brush for. So just paint with it on its edge and watch what happens. It just paints a lot of neat, interesting things for you. And you can go back with a different color in the wet areas and tap in some things that will just kind of spread into the parts that you've done. You can brush it sideways, or you can just tap and stipple. So it's a great stippling brush. Then with that technique I mentioned before, the more commonly known one, you go back in, flick up some grass here and there. For more control, you might want to use the corner. Okay. Well, in that same vein, I like to paint. I like to just kind of stroke it sideways and use it to paint ripples in water. You get a little bit more of a textural effect than you would with using a round. You could use a round brush or even a rigger, but I like this because it just kind of scumbles the edges a little bit and gives you some of these little raggedy marks and impressions. And something I saw an artist doing just recently is bouncing. Maybe for foliage. Now I'm not a big fan of stippling in foliage. I think it looks like you stippled it in. So if you go back and add some marks to it to kind of break it up, I'm a bigger fan of like painting forms when you see a lot of leaves like on a tree or a bush. But nevertheless, something you could experiment with, and maybe just bounce it into an area until you get a little more solid mass in places and break up that pattern. Another one is just bouncing it on edge. You can combine some of the techniques we already talked about. Just mess around with it and see what happens. So there you go, guys. Hope that gives you something interesting to play around with and try. Thanks for watching. Hope if this was a help to you, you'll like the video, maybe subscribe to the channel, and we will see you next time.